This is Ruslan Belov with you. Well, today we are expecting a phone call between Trump and Putin, initiated by the American side, meaning it was Trump who wanted to call Putin. What do you expect from this call? Because of course, without a doubt, Trump will now try to convince Putin that a ceasefire is needed, that hostilities should stop for 30 days, and so on. Share your thoughts. What are you expecting? As for me, I'll tell you right away. I don't believe Putin will agree to a ceasefire. The army has significantly increased its momentum. We haven't seen such numbers since the spring of 2022. Now, let's continue analyzing the situation on the front. Let's move to the map. So friends, we've set a new territorial record. Yesterday was a record-breaking day not just for May, not just for this year, but for the past 3 years since spring 2022. Over 50 square kilometers came under our control in a single day. Let's go through each of these sectors in order and break down what exactly happened on the front. Let's start with the Lyman direction, or rather, more accurately, the Borova direction, because the attacks are not targeting Lyman directly, but are heading toward the Kharkiv region and Borova. See this red dashed line? That's the line of contact from a day ago. And this here is the territory that has come under control in the last 24 hours. We managed to advance 2.2 kilometers deep across a fairly wide front, about 5 kilometers wide. At this point, our forces are already right up against the border of the Kharkiv region. This bright red line marks the border between Donetsk and Kharkiv regions. Plus, part of the Luhansk region is also involved here. In total, we are now just 1 kilometer from Kharkiv region. Additionally, thanks to yesterday's advance, we've approached the village of Khrekivka, or its old name, Petrovskoye, from the south and east, and are now right at its outskirts. So we should expect assault operations to begin soon. Khrekivka is one of the last villages in Luhansk region still under Ukrainian armed forces control. The total area taken under control here yesterday is 9.1 square kilometers. And interestingly, do you know who's defending this area and whose units are regularly suffering breakdowns here? The Azov regiment, yes, that so-called elite. I actually posted a video in my Telegram channel showing Azov fighters fleeing, leaving behind wounded and dead. So follow the link in the description to my Telegram channel if you want to see what this elite really looks like. I won't be showing that here, of course. Moving on, there is no information from the Siversk sector or from Chasiv Yar. In the Toretsk area, there was only a minor advance, just 250 meters across a 600-meter front. A simple tactical improvement of positions, nothing too significant. But on the eastern flank of Mirnohrad, it's not just a tactical improvement. It was a total, I repeat, total collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces' defense. They completely fell apart here yesterday. This entire area, northeast of Nova Poltavka, from Nova Alanivka to Yablonevka, and south of that, came under our control. The total area of this collapse exceeded 20 square kilometers. And you know, if this had happened just once, followed by solid defenses, that would be one thing. But it's now happening regularly. For example, a Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Mukhnoi wrote that things are going terribly bad here for the Ukrainian forces. Look, 3 days ago, they collapsed in the sector from Oleksandropil to Zaria. Almost 40 square kilometers lost then. Before that, in the Mirnohrad area, another 20 square kilometers were lost. And now again, more than 20 square kilometers. So in the past week alone, just on the eastern flank of Mirnohrad and in the Toretsk pocket area, we've taken control of over 90 square kilometers. Plus 5 more villages. If this isn't a collapse, then what is? Of course, it's a collapse. Let's continue, because this wasn't the only Ukrainian collapse yesterday. Before we go further, a few more points about what this collapse means in this particular area. Let's look at the numbers. There were 2 main sectors where the collapse happened. The first is around Nova Poltavka. After taking the village the day before yesterday, we managed to push westward toward Shevchenko 1 and Popov Yar. We analyzed this area yesterday, and yesterday the Ukrainian defense was broken through to the east and we advanced 4 kilometers toward Popov Yar and Poltavka. Now, from our current positions, Popov Yar is just 1.5 kilometers away. However, there's the Poltavka River, and to enter the village, it will need to be crossed. But that likely won't be necessary since our forces are already moving toward Popov Yar along the highway from the west. Meanwhile, the village and all access routes are now under full drone control, and from Poltavka itself, we are now just 1 kilometer away. I think an attempt to enter the village will likely be made today. That's for the area beyond the highway. Now for the second sector, from Novoalenivka to Yablonevka. Reaching Yablonevka itself is quite significant. Additionally, as you can see, we advanced well to the south and took large swathes of territory. But more importantly, we've now reached Yablonevka itself. The goal is to clear out this entire pocket to the south. And this is exactly what Ukrainian military experts are now panicking about. Here's another screenshot from the soldier with the call sign Mukhnoi. He clearly understands where things are headed, and as you can see, he says that right now there is a threat to them and a prospect for us that this entire southern pocket, which is a large area, will completely collapse. What's needed for that to happen? The front line needs to be leveled along the line of Yablonevka, Alexandra Shultina, Katerinovka, and Klebanbik. Reaching Yablonevka is the first step in that operation. Let me say right away, it won't be easy. These villages are not small and are well fortified. The Ukrainian command clearly understands what a further collapse could mean for them. That's why they are urgently pulling in reserves and will hold on to these villages with everything they've got. Nevertheless, for now, it's clear that this section of the front has locally collapsed. Over the past week, 5 villages and 96 square kilometers have been taken here. Let's move on. In the Pokrovsk direction, things are quiet for now, but in the area just before Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, there has been some progress, north of Kotlyarovka. Well, some progress. In fact, they managed to advance 3.5 kilometers deep, though on a narrow front, just 1 kilometer wide. The total area that came under Russian army control here is 3.5 square kilometers. And finally, the last sector where significant progress was recorded is in the south of Donetsk Oblast, more precisely at the junction with Zaporizhzhia, the Komarovsk direction. Yesterday, closer to the evening, Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses and entered 2 villages, Novopol and Zelenoy Pole. Fierce battles are currently ongoing in both villages. The breakthrough here is also impressive, about 4 kilometers in depth and 5.3 kilometers wide. The total area that came under our control is 13.1 square kilometers. The main goal here, of course, is to continue down the highway and reach Huliaipol from the north. But let me say this. Despite all these collapses, that remains a distant prospect for now. Still, the fact that issues have now begun here as well, that the Ukrainian side is also experiencing breakdowns here, this is not the first time either. Just a few days ago, there was also a collapse of more than 10 square kilometers in this area. So the fact that problems are emerging here, even though they held their positions for weeks previously, says a lot. And it's possible that the battle for Huliaipol will begin earlier than expected. Now let's summarize everything. First, on the Lyman axis, the Russian army advanced 2.2 kilometers in depth across a 5-kilometer wide front. The area taken under control, 9.1 square kilometers. On the eastern flank of Mirnograd, there were 2 breakthroughs. In the area east of Novopoltavka, forces advanced 4 kilometers deep and up to 4.6 kilometers wide. Additionally, they advanced from Novoalenovka toward Yablonevka and southward. Depth of 3.7 kilometers, width of 6 kilometers. Total area that came under Russian control in this section, 24.4 square kilometers. Third, in the area before Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, forces advanced north of Kotlyarovka. The area taken under control, 3.6 square kilometers. And finally, in the Komarovsk direction, just discussed, the total area that came under our control, 13.1 square kilometers. In total, 50.2 square kilometers came under Russian army control yesterday. This is a new record for daily advance, not just for May, not just for this year, but for the last 3 years, since the spring of 2022. And you know, it's noteworthy that a short time ago another record was set, 45 square kilometers in one day, and now, just days later, that was surpassed with 50.2. I hope this trend continues and that this summer we'll see advances of hundreds or even more square kilometers per day. Yesterday, Bloomberg published an article saying that Putin now has confidence in the army, believing it can cause the collapse of the Ukrainian front and that 4 regions will be taken by the end of the year. You know, I don't think it'll happen by the end of the year. I'm not as optimistic as they are. Of course, I don't have access to the full information Putin does. But looking at this trend, just consider how things began. March and February were sluggish, with daily gains of 10 or even fewer square kilometers. April was slightly better, with an average of 11 square kilometers per day, I believe. Yes, 11 square kilometers per day in April. But now we're regularly seeing 20, 30, 40, and now even 50. The trend is clear, and it's also clear that, at this pace, all the goals could be achieved within a year and a half. So in that sense, it's understandable why Bloomberg published such an article. Why settle or negotiate based on current positions when the map could look completely different in just a year? Well, that's all for today's Frontline update. Now, a few words about politics and Russia's new drones. The Geran 3 is on the hunt, which is evident from the record-breaking drone strike on Kyiv, according to Russian military observers. There was a massive raid by Russia's Geran strike UAVs on Kyiv and the surrounding area. Kyiv counted 273 strike drones participating in the attack, setting a new record. The previous record was 267, set back in February. Results are still being clarified, but what's important to understand is that the effectiveness of these strikes has significantly increased lately. American military experts, contradicting their Ukrainian counterparts, report that in April, the effectiveness of Russian drone strikes increased by 1.5 times and now stands at 36%, and continues to grow. That means 36% of drones are hitting their intended targets. That doesn't mean the rest were shot down. Some may have failed due to technical issues or missed. Assuming that this attack had the same level of effectiveness, about 100 Geran drones hit their targets today. Of course, they caused serious damage, especially considering that the new models of these UAVs carry nearly double the warhead payload, 90 kilograms compared to the previous 50, thanks to increased flight speed. Russian drones now control the Kramatorsk-Dobropilya highway, located 40 kilometers behind the front lines, and this is being reported by Ukrainian sources. Footage of one of these drone strikes is spreading across Ukrainian public channels. There are also increasing reports of issues with movement along this highway. Ukrainian analysts are puzzling over how this is even possible. They speculate about a mothership drone hovering at high altitude, outside the range of air defenses, which launches FPV drones that are guided via a fiber optic cable. Modified Molniya FPV drones are reported to be resistant to electronic warfare. Another new Russian drone, the Tuvik, is said to be equipped with a homing system and also resilient to EW systems. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio stated that Congress will adopt a new sanctions bill against Russia if no progress is made in negotiations on Ukraine. According to Rubio, the White House will not be able to stop or control the passage of this bill. Quoting him, "We've informed the Russians that Congress will pass a sanctions bill if no progress is made in Ukraine negotiations. The adoption of a sanctions law by Congress against Russia is something we cannot stop or control." According to media reports, Rubio also said that the U.S. does not wish to engage in endless negotiations over Ukraine, but rather wants to see real progress in the coming days. Ukraine is anxiously awaiting today's conversation between Putin and Trump, writes the Washington Post. The Ukrainian leadership is increasingly alarmed over the planned phone call scheduled for Monday. Trump has clearly stated that he intends to discuss terms for ending hostilities in Ukraine with Putin. However, Kyiv and Moscow remain far apart on what constitutes a fair deal. Zelensky and his aides want to ensure that Putin and Trump don't present Ukraine with a fait accompli, a completed deal that Ukraine is forced to accept. Donald Trump reportedly wants to meet with Vladimir Putin as soon as possible. The location and date of the meeting are currently being negotiated, according to Secretary Rubio. Multiple sources confirm that preparations for a summit between the two leaders have indeed entered an active phase. One theory is that the most likely venue will be the October 2025 summit in Malaysia. However, political figure Oleg Tsaryov commented, "I believe the first meeting will take place much earlier. By the time the Malaysia summit occurs, Russian-US relations could already be supported by signed agreements. US Secretary Rubio also said that the previous negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul were not a waste of time. According to him, Russia is preparing a document outlining its ceasefire demands for Ukraine, while Kiev is working on its own list of conditions. It remains to be seen how this exchange of demands will proceed, directly through the US, as is currently being suggested, or through Turkey, which mediated the Istanbul talks. We'll cover the outcomes of the upcoming Putin-Trump talks in our evening report. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stay connected with us.